Greetings, it is I, Cantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the forgotten collectible card games of old. Collectible card games that most of which have fallen by the wayside, dropped in popularity, might not be published anymore. They're the older ones that we just don't see around as much, if any, anymore. We started, of course, talking about Vampire the Eternal Struggle, the third collectible card game ever released based around the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game system. We began diving into the rules and talking about the phases you could take during your turn. We're going to start with two more phases that we're going to begin. We're going to try to tackle two more phases this turn. Let's start with the Master Phase. This is the point in time where you take a Master Phase action. This action represents your personal activity during the course of a turn. Now, by default, you only get one Master Phase action, though there could be cards or effects which might be able to give you extra ones. The most basic version of this is to basically play a Master card and use this Master card action that the card itself is having you do. There is possibly other uses of your Master card action that do exist that cards could give you the option of using. You would use that one instead of your normal, I play a Master card. If you played an out-of-turn Master card during another of Methuselah's Master Phase, then you basically eat up one of your Master Phase actions that you had had this turn. You have one less than you would have had from whatever it would be. If your default's still one, it means you get none. Or if you had some extras, well, then you've lost one of them. If some form of effect is triggered on your Master Phase, you choose the order that those effects take place in. You are allowed to intersperse those effects with your Master Phase actions. So you could have an effect, Master Phase action, effect. You basically choose the order of the combination of the effects and the Master Phase actions, the one or multiple if you happen to have them, choose the order of all of them. Now, if you should have leftover Master Phase actions at the end of the phase, it does not get saved. You cannot save it for later in the turn. You only have the opportunity to use it now. So either you use it or you lose it. Now let's talk about the Minion Phase. This is the largest phase that you're going to be doing. It's the longest one with the most involved material to it. This is when any ready minions you have can take action. A ready minion is one that is untapped during this time period. You basically then choose actions for your ready minions to take, and this will tap them. They will become tapped upon using these actions. Other Methuselahs could use their still readied minions that they had in order to block the actions of your minions. This would involve them tapping their blocking minions. Any activity, any action that isn't blocked basically succeeds and goes into effect. You cannot start another action until the first action resolves, so you could have to resolve an action one at a time in order. This means that should you have a special ability or some kind of card or effect that will cause you to untap a minion after it's already taken an action, it is effectively allowed to take a second action. It means every time you can untap that minion during this phase, you get an extra action with it. So as you can see, you can get more than one action with a minion if you figure out a way to untap it. Now there are mandatory actions, actions that you are forced to take because of circumstances. For example, if you have a readied vampire with no blood on him at the beginning of your minion phase, you need to take a hunt action with that vampire. It is mandatory. If you have minions that both have mandatory actions and non-mandatory actions, the mandatory action minions need to be taken first. All of them need to be completed before you can start taking non-mandatory actions with the other readied minions you have. So you have to complete those readied minions with mandatory actions first. You can choose the order in which those mandatory actions take place. So if this minion has a mandatory action and this one has a mandatory action, I can choose the order in which they take place. If a minion has more than one mandatory action which is different from each other, that means these are mandatory actions that are unique, then it is stuck. It cannot take action. It cannot take either of these actions because it can't decide which one to do. Now, by default, a minion has two actions they could take: bleed or hunt. These aren't the only actions they can take, of course. You can choose to have a minion put into play a permanent card that assists you. This can be a piece of equipment, an ally, or a retainer. A equipment is an equipment action, a retainer is a retainer action, and an ally is an ally action. Though all these actions are very similar, that you take a permanent type card from your hand, put it into play, normally attached to a vampire, possibly attached to a vampire, each of them is the cards that you're putting out in play is very different. And I have talked about those types of cards a little bit already. If you have equipment, you are allowed to, as an action, switch that equipment around from one minion to another. This is also an action. Now, other than these default actions, your minion can also use a special action card from your hand. Effectively, you take an action card from your hand and you're playing it and allowing your minion to take that action. These can be something unique. They can also be an enhanced version of a normal default action, or they can be a political action which starts a referendum. I'll again talk about that a little bit more later. There are also special actions that you can take related to certain things. There are special rules related to dealing with anarchs and dealing with vampires and topor. I'm going to talk about each of those in their own section in a later episode. So that's it for today. I introduced you to, of course, first, the Master Phase. The point in time where you're playing your Master cards, which we talked about before, and using your Master Phase actions, which can be, of course, the Master card could be something special that you have on a card. You could lose it completely if you played an out-of-turn Master card. But there are effects that happen during this turn. Then I started to dive into the Minion Phase, the largest of phases that you're going to be taking. This involves the actions of your minions. I talked about the type of minions that can take it. A ready minion, one that is untapped, that you must tap it to perform that action, and your opponent could possibly tap theirs and use blocking actions to stop you from using yours. And in the end, of course, if you untap, you can get multiple ones, but if you're not blocked, resolve the action successfully, we move on. Then I talked about, of course, mandatory actions, stuff that you need to take, and that you have to take them first on your turn. Minions with them, act before minions that don't have mandatory actions. I then talked about the basic action types, the default ones, to bleed, to feed, the ones that put equipment into play, the equipment action, ally action, and retainer action. And of course, I moved on to the action cards and talking about the basics of them. In the next episode, we're going to get into more details about these default actions, or these actions you can take, and then move into talking about what it means to be taking an action on your turn. A little bit more information about that. But regardless, if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon. Link description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.